Welcome back to another episode of Strength in the Details. I am here with Dr. Susie Reiner, and I'm really excited to chat all things stress, stress management, and how that impacts our strength training and fitness. How are you, Susie?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Glad to finally have you on. I know we've been kind of missing each other, but I'm really excited to have you on. We chatted briefly at the ACSM conference last year, which is where I met you, and really just loved your background, especially as it relates to training, health and fitness, technology. And so I'm really excited to kind of talk all of those things as we go through here. But before we get started, tell us who you are. What's your background and expertise?
Sure. And I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me on. So, I am currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Kentucky. I'm split between the Sports Medicine Research Institute and the First Responder Research Laboratory. And I also run my own business called Theory X Health and Human Performance Consulting, where I partner with digital health and fitness tech companies in building their research and content around exercise and performance and health. So trying to build better products out in the industry and also, engage with users and build trust within product development. From my personal background is in the fitness industry. I worked several years in commercial fitness and before transitioning into like kind of this academia and research space. And I like to say that I'm a generalist because my research interests are like all over the place. I love strength conditioning, I love sports science and exercise physiology. And a lot of my work is also in exercise psychology and behavior change. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. And I also like to explore where technology plays a role across all of those spaces.
Awesome. And maybe we'll chat about that as we go. We just released the 2024 trends, and of course, wearable technology is at the top of that. So I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on that. I'm curious, how does sports medicine science and first responder, how does that work intersect, if at all? That's interesting to me.
Yeah. So the SMI, Sports Medicine Research Institute, does a lot of work with military and first responders and fire service. And the First Responder Research Laboratory obviously works quite a bit with law enforcement and firefighters. So we are my project that I came on for the postdoc is based on a direct access care program, and it's being able to for firefighters to work directly with an athletic trainer, strength conditioning coach, or physical therapist to prevent and mitigate injury and time loss. So that's the basis of the project that I'm working on right now. And then we also look at kind of like fatigue mechanisms within the fire service and law enforcement and being able to provide the best training possible, both on and off duty.
That's interesting. I never would have seen those two together, but that totally makes sense. Those are very high stress, high injury prone types of jobs, which require a lot of physical fitness and especially muscular strength and endurance, that type of thing. Those jobs are really stressful. So in the context of athletic performance and maybe even first responder work, how do you define stress? What does stress mean? Let's give people a foundation for that.
Sure. I think that stress has kind of a bad rep right now because we so commonly refer to it with chronic stress and the impact of chronic stress on our bodies and our health, long term health. But stress is just a stimulus, and it can be a positive or a negative stimulus. It is something from your external environment that's creating a stress response within your body. And it activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response. And that's not, so to speak, a bad thing. It's the way that we survive. It's in high level emergencies. It creates this cascade of effects in our body from the HPA axis. The endocrine system creates all of these responses that release, norepinephrine, epinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol that drives our heart rate up, our blood pressure up. It creates more carbohydrate availability so that we can deal with the stress at hand. So it's something that helps us build homeostasis, which is essential for survival. And on the flip side, we have the parasympathetic nervous system that helps us rest. It's our rest and digest activation, and this is where we recover the most. So it's always a balance between the two. You don't have only all parasympathetic. If we're that, I mean, we would just be sleeping all the time, right? We'd be so calm all the time that nothing stresses us out, and then we don't see any progress. We don't see any like improvement or adaptation to anything, right? But so when we have that sympathetic nervous system response, that stress response, it enables us to have an even stronger parasympathetic response, which I think is like so interesting in this adaptation to stress model, the Hans Selye, general adaptation to stress. Um, it tells us that we need stress. We need a stressor in our life to actually adapt to that stress. And then that's how we, persevere. And in athletics, that's our training stimulus. The training stimulus
Mm.
is the stressor that builds a training adaptation. So there's no adaptation without that stress. The problem is, on the flip side, our lives are full of stressors. We have, psychological stress, and that builds psychological load on our bodies. We have work stress and academic stress, and all of these things pile up so that with exercise, it becomes, all of these things are compounding. Um, and even without exercise in the general public, if they're not exercising, if they're not doing any of these positive stressors, then that can build into this chronic stress response, which leads to like systemic inflammation and cardiometabolic conditions that we know so well about. So it's kind of this flip side of like, yes, we want stress, we don't want too much stress.
So, how do we strike that balance? That's interesting. That's an interesting loaded question for you.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's very individualized, I would say. And it comes down to what is going on at the present moment and how do you change your program or your exercise or your workouts or your life or your habits based on your current level of stress. Because in some instances, if you have low levels of stress, maybe you have a little bit of like things brewing, but a workout will make you feel better. That instance is, the positive stress builds that resilience, and you can recover better. If you are really down, or you have, you're dealing with mental health issues, I think grief is a really good example here of, you have things on your mind that are very heavy. Sometimes building that into a workout program, like that's when it might be better to be a little bit lower intensity or lower volume overall. It's kind of it's a give and take of when's the best time to push and when's the best time to back up and recover a little bit more.
So what I'm hearing is that it's really important for athletes to learn what types of stressors are happening, right? That they're experiencing. Because what I've encountered with athletes is that they come into the gym, something goes wrong, their training doesn't feel good, everything feels heavy, they feel achy, and they immediately blame the training session. Well, the training session was too hard, or the weight was too heavy, or it was too intense. Where what I'm hearing you say is that there may be an imbalance between the stressors that are happening as a part of the training and the stressors that are happening outside of the gym in our typical everyday life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes down to, I think that we blame exercise a lot for our problems. And I think that goes into like the recovery of like, exercise can be difficult and can be hard. It's a matter of like, it might feel harder. Like the same workout will feel different based on your psychological load that you're coming in with. You can do the same exact number of sets, number of reps. If it's, aerobic, the amount of volume and intensity that you're doing. If you're coming in with no stress, you're feeling good, maybe it's a weekend day, you have less things going on in your mind, that workout will be it might feel easier than when you're coming in with a lot of stress, a lot of psychological load, and all of a sudden that workout feels completely different, and your body reacts to it completely differently because you might have a higher heart rate throughout the entire workout, same exact workout as you did last week, right? It's a matter of how psychology plays a role in this stress response because you might already have circulating cortisol that is increasing your stress response already coming in. So it's like, so then with the workout, that builds it even higher. And then if say you're struggling with sleep, or you don't take time to recover from that workout, you go straight into the next workout, straight into the next workout, day after day, your body is in this state of decline then because it can't get back to that homeostasis.
Hmm. So, when we think about how we measure or evaluate our training intensity from any given day, what suggestions would you have for athletes to kind of consider when their stress response might impact how they're feeling in training?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of twofold, and it can be objective and subjective. Objectively, we can look at our data. A lot of people are wearing wearables. You can see, if you didn't have good sleep quality last night, if you didn't sleep enough, if it's different than your norm. I think the point here is like it has to be measured over time, because I'm going to go on a tangent. But if someone's starting a new exercise program, it's always going to feel hard, right?
Right.
If you are doing the same exercise program for a while and one day it feels harder, there might be another reason why. Um, so data plays a role there. You might see like an uptick in your resting heart rate, which is abnormal for you. Sleep is absolutely a contributing factor here. And also like on the subjective side, because if you sometimes our mind plays a trick on us and we're just in a bad mood and we can pick that up with exercise. But if we are always in a bad mood and we always come into exercise within a bad mood, that can be detrimental to your experience in exercise, and getting into exercise psychology. If you start associating exercise with a negative emotion, then it's hard to continue exercising, because this feedback system. So
Right.
it's a matter of figuring out where these feelings are coming from. Is it coming from, are you walking into the gym feeling that way? Are you walking into the training facility feeling that way? Or is it literally from the exercise? Because exercise can give you, negative emotions if it's at a high enough intensity. Like that, we have research behind that. High intensity, high heavy domain exercise is associated with negative feelings, but those are fleeting,
Right.
right? And I think this plays a like I think this is a funny thing that I've been thinking about because stepping into a cold plunge is a very unpleasant feeling. But so is do it like and if you do 3 minutes in a cold plunge, that's unpleasant. But also, 3 minutes all out on a bike is also unpleasant. So I'm like
Right.
questioning why people are running to dunk into a pool of cold water, ice water, versus like just get on a bike and go all out and see how you feel after that. Like I
Yeah.
don't know what like where that disconnect is coming from.
Sounds like a good study that we should do.
Yeah.
Are there certain signs that coaches should be aware of when stress starts to impact an athlete's physical and mental well being or progress in the gym?
Yeah, I think it comes down to coaching is an art and coaching is a people industry and fitness is a people industry. Like you have to be able to talk to people and relate to them and understand their behaviors and observe their behaviors. Um, and that comes into basics of this field of it's not about you, it's about the person you're working with, because being able to detect change in someone just on their behavior without them ever saying anything, like if you've worked with any individual regularly over time, like their moods, when they're high energy, when they're low energy, you might be able to tell that something is wrong or you might not. And they might have the opposite reaction of being super completely engaged, but then usually that's not like what their you know usual behavior is. So it's idea of like detecting change in someone, I think, is really important. Subjective well-being scales have been very successful in this space. Just being able to say how do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10 regularly during a workout or before a workout coming in, that's been really successful for coaches to understand change over time. So if someone always comes in saying 7, 8, I feel good, um, and then one day they come in saying 4, being able to assess, okay, maybe this is the day where I give them 3 sets rather than 4 sets, or we just dial down the intensity a little bit because they're going to reach exhaustion sooner on a different day. So it's a matter of balancing the personal relationship that you have with your athletes and your clients, the data that you have access to, their wearable data, their day to day, like quantified self type of data, um, and then using your own tools that work for you as the coach to say, I can understand where everyone is at on any given day.
So as a coach, we're helping athletes overcome stress, because one thing that I think people in general, but athletes in particular, I think fail to over or fail to see is that stress is not, you can't eliminate stress, right? Like we will all experience stress to varying levels. It's about how we cope with it, and it's about how we manage that stress that's important. So could you talk a little bit about resilience? What does that mean in the context of sport?
Yeah, I think resilience is an interesting topic because it's kind of the psychological layer of like what we feel about stress. And I think some people are innately more excited about being challenged, and some people aren't. And they see a challenge as something that's going against them versus something that's challenging them and kind of up leveling them. And that's a question that I've had quite a bit. I don't know how to test it, but is this type of self-efficacy that we see in resilient, so to speak, people, is that an innate gene, or is that something that they can learn over time? And it comes into like this discussion of, do we give everyone a trophy, or do we let people feel like they lost? And it's children mostly, not really, not adults. But how do we deal with adversity, or how do we deal with not being on top all the time, because that's not how life is. And life changes, and I think this idea of change and things not going your way or going a different way than you expected is something that one, people learn over time through their own experiences, but also there's a role for the coach and for the trainer to play a supportive role in being able to talk about those emotions, and understand that people are not going to feel good all the time, but they can use that as it's kind of like the growth mindset, where it's an opportunity for growth versus something that's putting you down. Um, and I think that this mindset type of idea is really popular right now in competitive sports and sports psychology, because there's a lot of different methods you can use. You can use self-talk and reframing and cognitive restructuring around a challenge, which can help someone think about. I just recently heard something about saying, if you're going to like a public speaking engagement, like, you're not nervous, you're excited. And just switching, like, it's a good thing. You're not here for a bad thing. Like, no one's ever doing sport because they don't want to. There's always a reason to do, be participating in athletics. It's because you want to be there. An exercise and an exercise session and a training session, you don't have to go, but you go. So it's like you're volunteering to be there. This idea of you get to versus you have to. Reminding yourself of that I think is really important, and also reminding yourself of what you've already accomplished. And I think a lot of people go through all of these different steps to their career, to their athletic abilities, to anything in life. Is like, on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing, and you're always thinking forward. And this level of recognition of what you've overcome in the past, or what was really difficult and you did it no problem, being able to cite those things in times of doubt can be really important. I see it in academia, like always going to the next grant, or always going to the next research project, or getting to the next publication or the next conference. And it's always this movement forward. But it's like, a few years ago, what did your CV look like? Like, what were you trying to get into, and who were you working with, and who are you working with now, and who you're collaborating with now, and what are the experiences that you're having now, and how does that compare to where you wanted to be in the past? It's kind of being able to reflect is also part of recovery, I think.
Are you seeing, these are all really great points. Are you seeing differences in resiliency based on any specific individual characteristics and things that come to mind, like age, gender, race, like any of those things? Are you seeing differences in the level of resiliency?
I think that's a great question. I honestly feel like we need to build more resilience older age. I think that there's like a level of inhibition in younger adults and even like adolescents into young adulthood. There's a level of inhibition and confidence because you're not really like aware of what is capable, what you're capable of, or what can life throw at you. So I kind of have this idea that resilience may actually be reduced over time because we start maybe doubting ourselves of like, oh well, I could do that when I was younger, but I don't know about now, and
Yeah.
that creates a limitation. And I think this is a great point of how we engage people with exercise, talking about exercise psychology, how we engage people in exercise because or in sporting activities at an older age if they've never participated before or they participated a lot, a long time ago. Um, that might be an activity they really, really, really want to do, but they don't feel comfortable doing it anymore
Hmm.
or trying something new. So I think that level of resilience and knowing that you're capable and you have the resources to do something um, has to be supported and cultivated throughout life and throughout different stages of career and exercise abilities and um, even just like hobbies. Like you can do something new, but it's hard to get that feedback to know that you will be successful doing it, or there's no backlash of you trying something new.
Right. Right. That, I mean, that's really great points. And I've worked with athletes of all age ranges. And I think there's a different, like you, to your point, there's a different level of resiliency. But I think that different level of resiliency, at least from my experience, comes from a person's environment,
Mhm.
their social support, their family structure, their background. So it's just interesting how you would tackle stress management and resiliency at these different key life stages. That's always been, interesting. How you coach a youth athlete who comes in versus someone, in an older age bracket, and how you challenge them in their fitness journey may look a little bit different, and also the inputs that these different athletes are experiencing are different.
Yeah, absolutely. And also like the life experiences they're coming in with are very different.
Yeah.
um, so how you play a role as the coach in exercise programming and encouragement and recovery strategies, like that'll change based on the individual.
So we're talking about stress, and I've experienced, an athlete, they come into the gym, they're like, hey, I've had a stressful day, or something didn't go my way, or I'm feeling a certain type of way. You know, how do you balance the fine line between pushing an athlete to achieve their best in performance and ensuring that they are not burning themselves out or experiencing excessive stress? Like, where is that line, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think as coaches and fitness professionals, we're good at pushing people. We know like where people's boundaries are of like how far can they go, and how to program that stimulus very specifically. I think that we can fine tune how we help them recover because when in a coaching session or a personal training session, you have finite time. So in that time, you're going to be pushing them, and you're going to be working with intensity and playing around with all of the different variables of exercise programming to do so. But it's really about the other time during the week during the day that is a conversation to have with the athlete, because it has to do with what is your sleep like, how what time are you going to bed every night, what time are you waking up, is there a sleep consistency issue, is there a sleep quality issue, understanding like if they have children that are waking them up in the evening, if they have other worries in their life, I'm not saying, get into the psychology aspect of this, where it's out of our scope, but being able to understand what's going on in their life, and how to program their recovery very specifically. Because just like, we have aerobic conditioning, we have strength training, we have power training, we have all of these variables that we help to control in their overall programming. How are we programming their recovery to make sure that they are taking it, to make sure that they get the adaptation that we want from their exercise program? I think that's where we sometimes fall down on the job of like, okay, great session, what are your goals for sleep for the next week until I see
Mm.
you again? Let's talk about how we can set goals around recovery. What are types of recovery strategies you enjoy doing? Some people really don't like meditation and mindfulness. It creates more psychological distress. So telling someone, why don't you try meditation, and then calling it a day and walking away and saying you did your job, like that's not it.
Right.
You have to play around with different types and then ask for feedback. How did that work for you? How did you feel? What's your resting heart rate been recently? That has its own flaws, but there are just ways that you can talk to them about their holistic program rather than
Mhm.
just focusing on the exercise.
Hmm. Very helpful. I know we're focusing a lot on the idea of holistic athlete development. So where does stress and resiliency play in the overall training program? How do you integrate those principles as a health professional, as a fitness professional, or as a sports coach?
Yeah, I think it comes down to creating a recovery program that's personalized and customized to the individual. Not everyone's going to want a cold plunge. Not everyone's going to want to go into a sauna. Not everyone's reaching the physical activity guidelines to go into these recovery strategies, right? So it's about understanding what their current habits are, where they could benefit from more exercise, more intensity, more stimulus, and where they could back off and try to create more space in their schedule for recovery. And I think this comes into like this level of productivity that we have an idea that we have to be productive all the time. Um, Being taking recovery, making sure you're sleeping enough, making sure that taking naps. And I saw you took a nap today, right? Did you take a nap or did you skip
I
over
did
it?
at 11 a.m. I did. I took a nap.
Yeah, like literally saying, I didn't sleep last night, so I'm going to make sure I take a nap so that I'm at my best during the day. Like that is a recovery strategy. That is doing something for yourself to ensure that you are working at your best always.
Right.
So I think, scheduling this type of stuff is really important. If you're someone who likes checklists, I love checklists. I will write these things down to make sure that I do them. So that there's never this feeling of like, I should be working and I'm doing this instead. No, this is also a part of my day and it's an essential part of my day.
Right. I think because we have so much access to one, information, two, what other people are doing, three, the highlight reel of social media, it does get hard to feel like you're not doing enough and feel like you're constantly having to do more. And that's something that I really try to work with and partner with my athletes on, is to understand, like, what does doing more mean? Because we have this, and this is a part of like what I'm studying, but we have this finite 24-hour period. So if you're doing something more here, usually it's in training, they want to do more training, you're sacrificing something else. And so what is it that you're sacrificing, and how is that going to like negatively impact the stress that you're trying to relieve, or the strength that you're trying to build, or the skill that you're trying to learn? And how is that going to is that does that outweigh the benefits of doing more? And I think that that's a really important topic to talk to athletes about. It's like, it's not always about doing more. Sometimes you have to be strategic about where you're spending your time and your effort and your energy. And I'd argue that if we are focusing more on the recovery aspect, or at least focusing on the recovery just as much as we do the training and the stimulus, I think we'd be much better off.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm remembering. I used to teach at a D1 school, and I had an 8 a.m. class, and several of my students would be, track runners or cross country runners, and they would come in, and they had been practicing for 4 hours already. They had been, they had a long run, they had a training session afterwards, and then they came into class, and they had not eaten breakfast yet.
Mm.
So they were, can we have some time to go get some food? And then, it was a 50-minute class. And I'm like, I mean, I'm not going to teach exercise physiology and not let you eat after a 4 hour session. So go get some food, please. So it's this idea that fitting it all in is incredibly difficult. And if we look at collegiate athletes, there is so little time in their day that's available and free. That recovery to them might be making sure that they're eating enough so that their energy availability is meets their activity needs. um, it could be just spending time with friends or family. I mean, these are things
Mhm.
that we put aside for school, for work, for for our exercise. But that might be something that you need to schedule so that you make sure that you get that recovery, so to speak,
Mhm.
this level of stress relief.
Right. So we've been using the word recovery, and I'm interested in your perspective. Is there a difference between rest and recovery?
Yes and no. I think this is like a loaded subject because there's so many different modalities that are taking the spotlight. Um, but I think that, I mean, my belief, and I hope that most exercise physiologists will confirm this, is that recovery in and of itself comes from a balance between sleep, nutrition, and exercise. These are your basics, these are your table stakes. If you are not dialing in your sleep habits, then doing other recovery modalities, do them to help your sleep, because the sleep is what matters, right? Um, Resting is fine. Like, you can rest, you can
Hmm.
also take a walk, and that's active recovery. So, called
Hmm.
active recovery. And you get the same benefits of, soreness reduction and maybe pain reduction that you would driving to a sauna studio and doing a sauna session. So it's like there are many different ways to recover. And there's
Hmm.
not like one size fits all of like, you have to do this or you're not recovered.
Mm.
No, like you can just kick your feet up and rest for a little while, then go for a walk, and then have, a nice balanced meal, and you're recovered.
Right.
Watching your favorite show and laughing might be your way of recovering, as long as you're not doing it for like 6 hours at a time.
We got to talk about sedentary screen time. I know.
Exactly.
What evidence base do we have for what is actually effective recovery tools versus what is mostly gimmicky? What is out there just as a sales tactic?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, I would say obviously we have a ton of research for sleep, exercise, and nutrition. Nutrition, I'm talking about, not supplements, but making sure that you're getting enough carbohydrates, making sure you're getting enough protein for protein, muscle protein synthesis, getting enough hydration for cellular repair. All of these things are really essential. Healthy, fats and everything. Balanced diet, table stakes. Um, Tons of research obviously behind sports nutrition practices.
Right.
Exercise, we know the benefits of this eustress, and being able to recover from exercise and the cross adaptation response of exercise. So absolutely a recovery strategy, but also a stressor in and of itself. And then sleep, we know the benefits of sleep. Interestingly, there's like a U-shaped curve of sleep benefits. Too little sleep is going to cause issues in performance decrement and health issues, and chronic health and even mortality risk. Also, like long sleepers are we're seeing more issues with 10, 11, 12 hours of sleep every night. Probably indicates a different issue, underlying issue. I've never slept 12 hours at a time, but uh, something to think about. If you interact with people, and you find that athletes are sleeping 12 hours every night, there might be some underlying issues to talk about. Um, Outside of that, we have seen, some benefits in heat exposure and cold exposure. Um, And heat exposure, I'm talking about sauna or even just like a warm bath.
Mhm.
We know that these are relaxing activities. Um, they improve your parasympathetic tone, so they increasing your body temperature above normal or decreasing your body temperature below normal creates a stress response, right? And then having that time and that quiet time to yourself during those moments, those help to improve parasympathetic activation following that session. So that's why we see benefits in the stress response and stress levels following like a sauna session or bath or a cold plunge. Um, as far as cold plunge, I do want to like note that there are some things that we want to pay attention to, because if we are targeting any power outcomes or strength outcomes or speed outcomes in our training, we might see a decrement in performance with regular cold plunge, that we wouldn't see with any other modalities, because that can stunt muscle protein synthesis following a cold plunge session. So that there's quite a bit of research covering that with cryotherapy and cold water immersion. So if, in your training, if you're regularly doing that type of training and you're aiming for improved strength, power, or speed, that might be a time where you lay off the cold, and maybe pay attention to some other recovery strategies. Um, they don't replace these types of things. They don't replace regular exercise and an active recovery. The one thing about heat and cold is that they help to reduce soreness, levels of feelings of soreness. Um, so I think that appeals to a lot of people, and people want to feel better. And that's a natural response. It's you want to
Yeah.
feel good. It's the same thing about with massage as well. Um, some of that will be like placebo related, psychologically related. I mean, if it works for you. It's just a matter of like, what is the source of the pain? If you're consistently sore after workouts, maybe look at your programming. We know that you're not, it's not a sign of a good workout if you're sore all the time. So understanding, how it fits in to an overall training program is important. Um, I mean, there are obviously companies that are very, very commercial in all of these spaces, um, spewing the biggest claims of improved, um, everything, health, exercise, skin, anything under the sun,
Gut
everything
health.
under the sun.
Can't forget gut health. Gut health.
Oof, oof. But that might literally just because like you just might be relaxing,
Yeah.
and all of these things are creating like total body changes over time that you could get from other things, but you might be missing out on the benefits of exercise, balanced nutrition, and sleep quality. So I think, focus on those and then build on top of that, with any additional recovery tools. I mean, I like to also think about from a public health perspective of like what people have access to and what they don't. You have every availability to do a cold shower versus a cold plunge. Being able to take a warm bath versus a sauna session that costs money per month. There are ways to integrate this into an overall plan that works for you and your budget and your accessibility. But it might just come into like deep breathing and meditation, mindfulness, sitting quietly, sitting without any screens, sitting without any social media, reading a book, going outside for a walk, spending time with your pets and your family and your, anything and everything is available to you. You just have to figure out like what gives you the most energy after you do it.
Those are all really great suggestions. And I think that it's important that people understand that those are all a part of recovery, because I think that we often just go to massage or cryotherapy session or whatever, but like sometimes it's just about getting out of the atmosphere of the gym and get out of your workout clothes and do something else that brings you joy and makes you happy. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to finish up with just a quick conversation on wearable technology, both how we can use this to benefit our training, and then maybe what are some of the downfalls or pitfalls that people fall into when considering wearable technology?
Sure. I think that wearable technologies just gives us a wider view of our health and performance and current status any given moment. Because everything, there's an ebb and flow to everything that we do. So all of your data points are going to change day to day, month to month. Obviously there's certain times in your life where everything is different, physiologically, and other times where maybe there's a time of like complacency where you haven't really changed what you've been doing, and then there are consequences to that.
Right.
And I use that example because I was kind of doing over the holidays I got sick twice, and like I rarely get sick, upper respiratory type stuff, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, why am I getting sick so much? And I started thinking, and you could see that on wearables. You can see the temperature was increased, or all of these things. There's a lot of research in like the COVID detection, early COVID detection
Hmm.
with wearables. But I started thinking, okay, well, I need to start stressing my system so that I have more immune resilience. Like I'm literally thinking in like building these principles of stress resilience into my programming because I saw an effect in my health and immunity that was abnormal. So it's kind of like just understanding what your body is doing over time so that you can make changes to your program and adjust what you're doing for better health and
Right.
performance.
Right.
Um, I think it's a great monitoring device for coaches and trainers to use with their clients because I talked to a lot about this previously of like you don't know what's going on behind their facade. Someone might come in feeling really really great, but then if you can have access to their sleep scores, they didn't sleep at all last night and they like
Right.
just hugged an energy drink and they came in and they're like trying to fake it. You put someone like that under a bar with a heavier weight than they're used to, like there's a higher chance of injury, and they will not be able to perform like they would last week with less weight. So it's like playing around with how much information do you have or want with your client to understand the best practices for their training session. Um, what was the second question?
Yeah. What are and what should we be aware of? Like, what are some of the pitfalls of using wearable technology for training for everything?
Yeah, I think one of the aspects of wearable technology that's starting to improve now is what do we do with the data? Because there's a lot of information out on HRV and sleep and heart rate and VO2 max, even because they're using predictive equations to tell you what your VO2 max is, which I have issues with. But
Me
I
too.
don't know. I don't know what equations they're using, and
Because
but,
apparently mine has been terrible for years, and I'm like, that can't be right.
um, so with that information, like, what do you do with it? Like, what does the general population individual do with that information, or even just the athlete do with that information? Like, my HRV is low, but it's not low in comparison to 2 weeks ago, but it's low compared to like 3 weeks. Like there's so many different data points we can look at, and which type of measure we're using to measure that
Hmm.
HRV rating and the accuracy of all these different wearables. We have so much information that it's hard to sort through like how do we change our program and why do we change our program based on that data.
Hmm.
um, so I think that that's starting to change. We start seeing, AI coaches or different apps that are providing more access to information of like, this is what all of your data says. They're including like some subjective measures of like, what's your mood today and all of that. And then being able to say, this is the best program for you to do today.
Okay.
And that's like the role of the coach, but so many people are not using like a live coach anymore because they're using these wearables and they're just doing their own thing, which is awesome. Lifelong exercise is built on autonomy, um, but being able to provide more tailored recommendations based on the data that we're getting, I think is really, really essential and kind of the next step in all of this wearable tech type of revolution that we're in right now. Because we need to know what to do with it and also how to change behaviors.
Right.
Because, you can have all the data you want, but just because they know what their VO2 max is, so like, for example, doesn't mean that they're going to do more aerobic exercise or more threshold work to increase their VO2 max. Also, like understanding what the benefits are of increasing that and translating it to everyday life and what that means to them and their and what they do on a daily basis. Because we know, like, giving information, providing information and education is not a driver of behavior change. It's being able to relate it to what changes they will see.
Right.
um I don't, everything that's related to behavior change.
We love a good behavior change theory. So yeah, it was interesting when when we published the trends paper to see wearable technology, and we got quite a few questions on like how is it that wearable technology continues to be number one, and I don't know why. I can't tell you exactly why because I didn't ask all of these people, but I will say that we're seeing the wearable technology evolution, whereas it was just a step counter or a calorie counter. Like, I burned 500 calories in my workout and I got 10,000 steps today. But I believe wearable technology has become so much more now. And to your point, it's giving people so much more information to use, but what they do with it is really going to be critical. And then one area that I'm studying is like, they're getting this data, but in what context are they getting this data? What does it mean? Someone gets 10,000 steps. Well, are they an office worker who just got 10,000 steps in their workout and did no other physical activity throughout the rest of the day? Or are they a barista working a 5-hour shift and all they're doing is being on their feet? Those have two different implications for health. And, the same can be said for training. You come into training and your HRV is really low. Well, what does that mean for your training stimulus? Is that something we need to change within training, or is that something that you need to handle outside of training with maybe your nutrition or your sleep or your recovery? So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's so many different things you can explore with that. As far as like, what's the hierarchy of like, do we want more moderate, vigorous physical activity? Do we want more steps? Do we want more strength training? Like what's most important for that person? Like, what's their goal? And then also, what will be most impactful for their health?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't exercise because for their health. They exercise for a lot of different other reasons, and health is just one of them. So being able to prioritize a specific aspect of of fitness and exercise and programming, it's very difficult. And I think wearable tech gives you some more information, but I think you make a great point about like, what's the context of that? Because if they're sitting and not moving for 8 hours of a time at a time and then doing a vigorous exercise, like, great, they met the physical activity guidelines for Americans, like, okay, but they're sedentary. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're sedentary. So what does that how does that affect mortality and morbidity rates? It's like, what's more important?
Yeah,
What are you
absolutely.
finding? I mean, what are you finding so far?
I'm finding that we don't have we're not set up to accurately measure it yet, and that's kind of the first step. Is how do we triangulate accelerometry data, so a wearable technology device, with like a self-report or a previous day recall or something like that, so that we can marry that information together to understand, like, okay, what is the intensity, what is the time, what is the modality, and then actually how is that intensity translated into meeting the guidelines or not. So that's something that I'm working on, and I'm hoping that somebody gives me some money to do that.
I hope so too.
in the near future. Well, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. Strength in the Details is all about going beyond the reps and sets of programming and periodization and getting to the things that we don't really talk about. So before I let you go, what is your one strength in the detail? What is your one takeaway that you want people to hear when listening to this episode?
My takeaway would be stress is not always a bad thing. We need stress to survive and to adapt to better circumstances, but there's a balance between stress and recovery is absolutely geared towards your personal preferences and your personal needs.
Thank you so much for that. And I agree. I love that. I love that takeaway. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I cannot wait for listeners to hear it.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.